Welcome to Global Money Talk, brought to you by Sampro TV. Greetings to all of our viewers from across the United States, Korea, and around the world. We're coming to you live from the floor of the New York Stock Exchange in New York City, the financial capital of America. I'm your host, Tai Wong, and today I'm joined by Robert Driscoll, Senior Vice President and Biotech Analyst at Wedbush Securities. Welcome to the show, Robert. Thanks for coming.
Hi, Tony. Thanks for having me on.
So, I realized when I was thinking about our show is I actually don't, I'm not really sure about the difference between biotech and pharmaceuticals, and I think, and as many of our viewers might, I lumped them together. Can you just give us a quick rundown on what the differences are?
Yeah, sure. So really, the difference is just scale. So biotechs tend to operate in that kind of sub market cap of 500, sub 500, all the way up to kind of 5 billion. Above that, we started getting into the pharma range. So really, it's just a difference of scale. Biotech's really more focused on discovery and maybe just a few assets. Pharma companies with large pipelines really focus more on the commercialization side of things.
So ultimately, would you say that a successful biotech company will get bought out by the pharmaceutical company or get into a partnership with them?
Yeah, exactly. So I think M&A is a huge focus for biotech. You know, that's probably the focus of a lot of companies in terms of where they get their drugs to the certain stages of development. Sometimes they need that pharma money just to kind of push to those late stages of development. But in general, we don't really want biotechs building out a whole commercial side of things on their own because it's just inefficient on the capital side of things.
I see. So you're a PhD, and originally I think you were on the on the science side of the space. Can you give us just a general idea of where the challenges are in the space right now? Is it a question of we need sort of better research in theory, or is it a question of more of engineering where you have all the great ideas, you just have to figure out how to, I guess, extract that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really picking good targets, and really on the biotech side of things, and really just identifying the key areas of risk here. So there's lots of different risks in biotech, and we need to kind of get rid of those risks as time goes on. So we like to there's development risk, there's clinical risk, there's safety on that side of things. Is the drug safe to use in humans? There's also regulatory risk. So sometimes the FDA, just turns around and says, hey, we don't like the way you're doing this. And then there's management risk, and of course there's financial risk as well.
I actually just wanted to ask sort of a thematic question. In terms of the biotech space, where do you think the next big breakthrough drugs could be coming? Is it cancer therapies? Is it something like Alzheimer's? Is it weight loss?
Yeah, I mean, being backing up, we've seen a tremendous amount of innovation in this space, and it's been a really exciting space to be for the last 10 years or so. We've seen a lot of innovation on the obesity side of things recently. We've all heard of the GLP-1s. We've seen a lot of development in the oncology side of things, like in cancer therapeutics. A lot of kind of targeted therapies, precision medicine. I think the next big space, really ripe for innovation is on the autoimmune side of things. So these are diseases which affect a large proportion of the U.S. population. And then I think that there's just a lot of development there and a lot of focus for pharma in that area as well now.
So in terms of the financial markets, what macro themes are really important to the biotech space? Is it interest rates? I mean, you mentioned regulation just before, but what in terms of when we look at markets and the changes in markets, what really impacts the biotech space?
Yeah, interest rates have been a huge influence on the biotech markets. These companies need a lot of capital, and when that gets expensive, it gets a lot more challenging for biotechs to kind of attract that kind of money. The development of a drug can take 10 years or so, and there's just a lot of money that's kind of necessary to go into that. So we have seen challenges in the space as interest rates have gone up. This year it's been a fairly decent year for biotech. I think relative to the last couple of years where it's really been in the doldrums. We've been flat for about like the last 5 months or so as those interest rate changes have kind of maybe stalled. Overall lagging the broader indices like the S&P 500. I think a lot of that delta is really down to that hangover of 2020 and 2021, where there was a lot of was huge expansion in the number of biotechs that came out. Interest rates were very low. Money was cheap then. A lot of those companies were very early stage and maybe had some unrecognized risk in their pipeline, so very on the early side of things. So we think public investor dollars then, because of the interest rates, we're maybe a bit stretched now. Some of those biotechs failed. Losing money is not a good way to keep investors around, obviously. And just maybe structurally, it was less easy for companies to capture the attention of those investors. On the other side of things, it really helps with the IPO market. So the IPO window, if you will, kind of has remained relatively shut in the last couple of years. And maybe just to give you a sense of that, in 2021, there were 154 IPOs. I think the year before, 130 IPOs. This year, I think there were just 17 up to the end of September. So IPO is really, really important driver for that biotech industry in spurring investments. We'd expect the rate of new IPOs to maybe take up in the next year as those interest rates fall. Um, Investments get a bit cheaper, and then some of those companies that are further along in development in their pipelines, maybe more appropriately valued and allowing investors to kind of make money again.
In general, I mean, you're saying these drug development takes so long. You mentioned about 10 years or so. How do these companies fund themselves? I guess from very early stages, and maybe when they have something promising. Is it usually through private sources? Can they tap any public sources of funding?
Yeah, so on the private side, companies attract the attention of VCs. Kind of there are investors who focus more on the private side of things. There are investors who do both, and there's investors who exclusively focus on the public markets. So as if a company is public, it has the option to raise money in the public markets, or do a private raise as well. That isn't open. The prices are relatively different. There is a lot more money on the public side, so maybe a little bit cheaper to do it that way. But if you have a kind of some serious kind of committed investors who are maybe more willing to stick around for the long term and see out those 10 years, and kind of get through those stages of risk, maybe sometimes that's a little bit more attractive for companies. And we've seen that in the last year or so, where companies have been a little bit more reticent to use the public markets on the earlier side of things, and to use some of those private investors.
I know this is a difficult question to answer, but just to give the audience an idea, for for every 10 drugs that show some promise and people are spending a lot of money on, how many of them actually come to market and become significant drugs with significant uptake and breakthrough, roughly?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's statistics out there that I can't remember them off the top of my head, but I would say 9 out of 10 drugs generally, even that have shown promise in phase one, generally fail, to make it to that commercialization stage. And that's for a number of reasons. In phase one, maybe the drug was shown to be safe. In phase two, it wasn't shown to be effective for a variety of reasons. And those are all the risks that you kind of have to encounter in biotech. So, that's kind of very well acknowledged in this industry.
Yet, people always forget that when they argue about why drugs are so expensive. It's because the pipeline to develop them, is quite difficult. In terms of the recent election that we've had, I think came as a surprise, or at least the breadth of it came to a surprise of a lot of folks. Do you expect any effects from the election, on the space?
Yeah, so my colleague Laura Chico here at Wedbush recently did an analysis showing that biotech markets tend to underperform prior to election days and then subsequently outperform after that. So far we've definitely had a post-election bump up in the biotech market, not really outperforming other sectors yet. And I think that's really driven by just some of the uncertainty of Trump's healthcare policies, if he has any. Biotechs have enough risk to deal with on the development side. I'm not actually aware of any specific policies that he has in place or willing to kind of put in place that would be bad for biotech. Certainly, further attacks on drug pricing, which are actually a small part of overall healthcare costs. Any reduced funding for the FDA would be seen as negative. We need an efficient and consistent FDA for drug development. where plans take years to come to fruition. Changes to approval pathways can be really complicating and waste money. Whether it be higher bars for approval or even lower bars for approval, and kind of taking away the moats, competitive moats. NIH funding certainly trickles down to biotech innovation. Maybe not an immediate effect on the industry, but maybe important again for the kind of overall growth. And then just general less well-informed folks deciding healthcare policies might shift the focus of medical need in the wrong direction, so that that pipeline you spent years developing might not be seen as important anymore by payers and investors and so on. So on the other hand, there might be some very positive changes here. One of the more, heavily criticized aspects of the Inflation Reduction Act on the biotech side was for the prioritization of biologics or larger drugs versus small molecules. So that maybe made some programs more valuable than others, just simply based on that therapeutic modality, rather than whether or not they have an outsized clinical benefit. And so that made some disease areas a lot less attractive than others. So we'll wait and see. It's going to be really interesting. Whether you agree on or not with him, I think the appointment yesterday of Vivek Ramaswamy was probably a positive, just kind of given his overall experience in the biotech industry.
Oh, that's interesting. I hadn't realized that. So if I know you went into it, so, but if I could, if you had a magic wand or you had the ear of, Vivek or the president for, a few minutes, and you asked him to make one thing, make one change, regulatory, whatever it was, or funding, whatever it might be, to make, the environment more friendly for biotechs, what would it be?
Yeah, I mean, I think let's have a couple. Make sure the FDA is fully funded. Make sure that we can get these drugs approved consistently and efficiently, and then maybe to stop the attacks on drug pricing. The pricing of drugs is of course a contentious issue, and I certainly understand all parties' views on this. But the simple fact is, it takes millions and millions, hundreds of millions of dollars to take a drug from kind of the early stage all the way up to commercialization before companies even start making money. So,
Um, I think it may have happened during the pandemic in terms of the vaccines, and we saw things come to market. I guess come to market and come to broad general use much faster than we have previously. Would it help if the government were allowed companies to use their drug or test their drugs experimentally for people who are sort of in desperate need and say, we're willing, we don't really have any other options left. We'd like to try the experimental drugs, and we're willing to sign off on that risk. Would something like that help the industry in general?
yeah, so there are definitely programs already in place that allow that to happen. So specifically in oncology, where there's kind of accelerated approval pathways. So for drugs that have shown clinical benefit, they might get approval earlier, not on those survival endpoints, which are of course the most important, but on things like reducing tumor sizes. That's a pathway which has been utilized very successfully in certain cases. It's also turned out that drugs have been approved that, a couple of years later have been found to have no clinical benefit. In the last couple of years, those drugs have been more efficiently moved from market. In the early stages of that program, those drugs continue to be sold, and maybe that was a little bit of a problem. But we do have very efficient pathways for getting drugs approved. There's also something called expanded access. So biotech companies do sometimes allow patients to use their drugs, maybe not as part of a clinical trial or before they were approved as well. So those policies do exist. In general, I think the FDA does a great job in evaluating clinical evidence and protecting the public as it's meant to do.
In terms of just roughly, in terms of when a drug gets that accelerated treatment, how much faster is it than when during the normal course of events?
Yeah, so it can shave a couple of years. It depends on the indication and the setting of the certain treatment, but it can shave a couple of years off development. And that's a really if- capital efficient way for a company to they can save a couple of $100 million, get it to market, start bringing in some revenues, and fund some of those later stage really randomized studies that cost a lot more money.
I see. I see. So, any thoughts in terms of, are we likely to see some, interesting M&A in this space, going forward in the next year or so?
Yeah, so M&A, a really important driver, as I said, of biotech markets. As I said, biotech, they're really built for drug discovery and development, not really for commercialization. That, really requires established infrastructures. So it's really an end goal, and it helps recycle that capital back into the ecosystem. You know, those big wins for investors, actually helps to kind of, spur a little bit of generalist investment in the industry as well. And that's really helpful given kind of focused, market that we have. In general, M&A has been really quiet in the second half of this year. Just a handful of deals in that kind of $1 billion plus range. And that's maybe simply down to interest rates, capital being expensive. M&A also kind of comes in cycles as well. So, pharma companies really go out to do some deals when they start to have, loss of that patent exclusivity for some of their major drugs. And we've seen that in a couple of years, in the last couple of years. So like, for example, Merck is, looking to do some deals now as it, is loses some of that exclusivity. AbbVie did that. Pfizer did the big acquisition of Seattle Genetics or Seagen, in the last year or so. So we'll hopefully we'll see a lot more, in the next year, and especially as those interest rates come down and make, capital a little bit more cheap.
How so? Right now, the market's pricing in about maybe 75 basis points of cuts, in for 2025. Ideally, how much would you like to see rates come down to really give this market a bit of a boost in terms of funding and M&A?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we're going to see the days of the last couple of years where it was effectively zero. Um, but maybe half, half of that would be nice, half of kind of where it was. So a couple of points. Um, I think that would be really helpful, and it's also to do with the kind of predictability of those interest rate cuts, as well as kind of and maybe that's never going to get any easier kind of going forward, but that just really helps, pharma companies to plan and make kind of adjustments to its accounts where it can kind of make some deals happen.
That makes sense. That makes sense. So shifting a little bit, and you probably know that this question is coming with everybody talking about AI. So, what role do you think AI has in biotech, and do you see that evolving, and driving innovation to a significant extent?
Yeah, a lot of focus, of course, on artificial intelligence. So there are a number of new biotechs, that have, focused on, really focused on employing artificial intelligence. There's been a couple of areas, maybe generally, where artificial intelligence has played a really big role, and that's mainly on the drug discovery side of things. So, um, companies maybe identify a target, and they spend a lot of time trying to find hits to that target from which they can develop a drug. So AI can massively, increase that process from which would have been, screening millions of different kind of compounds, to making that a lot more focused, and that's making it a much more efficient process essentially. AI has also been really, really helpful in simply in target identification. So there's a massive amount of biology data out there, which biotechs and farmers kind of mine to look for some kind of those new targets which might affect certain diseases. Um, so just the ability to kind of process those large data sets is maybe best left to AI. Um, and just doing things that humans are less well able to do. So that's really exciting. I think there is really a long way to go until AI really affects, the overall speed of drug development. The rate limiting step here, is not really on the discovery side of things. It really is on the testing preclinically, testing in humans, testing the safety and efficacy, and getting that drug approved. That's really where the time and the money is spent, in biotech. So there's a few ways in which AI might help there, kind of making that process more efficient. Um, but in general, I don't think too many clinical development folks should be worried about their jobs, just yet. And even on the discovery side of things, we still need those medicinal chemists, those biologists to make sense of what AI is telling them.
So it sounds like it's actually a pretty good space to be in. Most folks won't be losing their jobs anytime soon. But so it won't. I guess it would. AI won't shorten the process by 40%, but it could probably, at least in the beginning, as you mentioned, in the beginning parts of it, make that discovery a little bit easier.
Yeah, and it also might, some of those targets, it might make the hit rate generally more successful. So maybe going from the 9 out of 10 to maybe 7 out of 10, and that would be a huge thing for the industry as well.
So when we talk about biotech, is there an index we should be looking for, or is it too disparate of a field to do that? Is there a biotech index that an investor can look at and say, oh, biotechs are doing well today or doing well this month?
Yeah, there's a couple. There's NBI, that focuses a little bit more on the larger cap side of things, and then there's also XBI, that focus maybe includes a few of the smaller companies as well. So we basically track those two indices in the market. They're used in different ways. I think investors should certainly, consider adding a little bit of risk sometimes to their portfolios by using those indices. They're also used, on the short side of things as well. Just kind of picking some, really good companies on the long side, and then using the indices, as the hedge on that side as well.
Now, um, I know you do a lot of research on, and we talked about some specific stocks that you liked. Are there a couple of stocks that you wanted to highlight that may be worth an investor taking a good look at?
Yeah, so maybe just to back up, just think about how an individual investor maybe should think about investing in biotech. So certainly those indices are maybe a good idea if they want to get involved. On the company specific side of things, maybe a focus on companies that are larger than 400 million market cap. Companies below a certain market cap are likely just to be a little bit more risky inherently, whether that's clinical risk or financing risk. Investors should maybe focus on companies with really robust balance sheets, especially in times where it is maybe a little bit more difficult to raise money. So cash runway for at least 2 years is something that we look for. Um, and then, companies with good management teams, have these teams done this before successfully? Experience really counts in biotech. And then companies, generally with multiple de-risking catalysts ahead. So clinical readouts, across their pipeline. Sometimes valuations can just simply be depressed just because of a catalyst desert as well. So, um, specifically, let's talk about a company called Revolution Medicines. RVMD is the ticker there, or we call them RevMed. So they're developing targeted therapeutics for the treatment of various cancers. Their main target is an oncogene called KRAS. So oncogenes are genes that, in certain circumstances, cause cancer. KRAS is one of the most, if not the most important oncogene in cancer. And remember, cancer's actually 200 different diseases. But KRAS is an important driver in about 20% of all cancers. So really important in some of the more prevalent tumor types, so like lung cancer, pancreatic cancer, colorectal cancer. Its role in driving these cancers has been known for decades, and it's just been a really difficult target to drug with chemistry. So there's just kind of no good binding sites on that protein. There were recently a couple of drugs approved here that target certain types of KRAS oncogenes, specifically in lung cancer. Um, RevMed is actually developing a drug. It's called RMC 6236 that effectively shuts down all types of KRAS mutations. They've shown really nice data in pancreatic cancer in mid-year this year, and just recently again. And they've recently started a late-stage study in that indication, so a phase 3 there. They're about to show some data in a KRAS-driven non-small cell lung cancer. That's going to be before the end of the year. We think that's going to allow them to start a phase 3, the late-stage development there as well. And then there's kind of, all the different settings within those two cancers where they can use this drug. And then they've got a pipeline of additional drugs that target those specific mutations that maybe they can combine with 6236 and get a really robust, response on the efficacy side of things. The safeties look really good here as well, a lot safer than chemotherapy and some of the immune agents as well. So we really like this company for the kind of the diseases which they've shown efficacy already, and then the promise of which they can, kind of expand this strategy out to different disease indications as well. Over $1 billion in cash as well, and that's cash for at least 2 years as well.
Okay, so I'm going to actually call up a chart. Can I get graphic one? This is a chart of revolution. And while they're doing that, I would say that that current price and 12-month target, it's a 5-year chart of revolution. And what Robert was saying, though, I think that that's his current, that's his target. And he's given us the disclaimers, and I'll just say, just for the viewers, that Wedbush may be a market maker in this name. They may also have an investment banking relationship. The analyst may or may not actually have a position in it. And this is the general disclaimer of this name and some of the names we might be talking about, just so everybody knows. So it sounds like a good one for if it's trading at 60, a 12-month target of $80. Looks like something that's well worth taking a look at. And there was another name that you were pretty high on that we were talking about before the show.
Yeah, there's a name called Geron Corp. This is a company which is developing and actually commercializing now a drug for the disease called low-risk myelodysplastic syndrome. So that's kind of a low-grade blood cancer that is very serious. It isn't, that low risk is kind of a misnomer. And these patients really suffer from really bad anemia. So um, Geron's drug is called imetelstat, was approved in June for the treatment of this disease after showing some really nice data. And there's really not a lot approved for this disease for these patients. After treatment with that kind of first line therapy, which is called EPO, which some of you might be familiar with from Lance Armstrong. For 75% of the patients, there's really no good options. And imetelstat was approved in this population. So recently went on the market. They sold, I think, $28 million in that first quarter. We think this drug can get to at least $1 billion in this indication alone.
Wow.
Next year, sorry, in the first half of 2026, we're not in 2025 yet. They'll have some interim data from a late stage study in another disease called myelofibrosis. There's some promise there for an kind of expanded market as well. So we really like the drug. We really like the efficacy. We know there's a really big unmet need in this market for patients. We think it's a buy here as well, even during the early stages of commercialization.
Great. Let's look at graphic two. We'll show our viewers a quick chart of Geron. And it's currently trading around 8, and your 1-year target, sorry, around 4, and your 1-year target is $8. And with that, sort of potential on the drug that you mentioned, I think that seems like quite reasonable and maybe a good investment. And then there was a name that you wanted to say were a little cautious about.
Yeah, there's a company called Zentalis Pharmaceuticals, so the ticker there is ZNTL. So this is a company developing a drug against a really interesting target called WEE1. Um, the inhibition of this protein basically messes up the cancer cell's ability to divide. Um, they've shown some reasonably nice data in diseases such as ovarian cancer. Actually, the main focus is ovarian cancer. In June, they disclosed that the FDA had placed them on clinical hold. So no new patients being allowed to take the drug in these clinical studies. And that's because they disclosed a few deaths of patients on these studies. So this is in context, these patients do have late stage ovarian cancer. That they don't have many other options in terms of what they can take for that disease. So unfortunately, the FDA just wanted to be a little bit more careful and make sure that those deaths weren't, or maybe, whether there would be better options for the patients. Obviously that's a very serious safety problem. They recently came off that clinical hold. The FDA let them carry on enrolling. So we will see some data kind of early next year. The problem here is that safety risk is a big problem, I think, just in terms of wider development. It may be suitable for that late stage ovarian cancer, but maybe really not in the maybe earlier settings. So we think the market is pretty limited for this drug. If you also look at the cash burn of this company, it's pretty significant, and it's maybe a little bit outsized of what they maybe need to allow development of that drug. So just maybe the company to be a little bit wary of, at least at this point.
Right, right. Um, And I guess, is it generally, you mentioned something called a clinical hold. Is that generally sort of a flashing yellow sign when if you ever see you know, a pharma company or a biotech company where a test is put on clinical hold, no new patients? Is that generally, you know, be wary here?
Yeah, that's a huge red flag, right? So usually it's because patients have died while taking the drug, and that those deaths have been attributed to the drug itself rather than the disease. Um, this is late stage cancer drug development is really difficult on the safety side of things. These are really difficult diseases to treat. Um, so we always have to be wary of the toxicity of these drugs. There's been cases where patients have been unfortunately died while taking drugs. Um, but the company's been able to take that time during the clinical hold to develop strategies that maybe lower doses, maybe more infrequent dosing, and find that kind of therapeutic window in which they can treat patients. So it's really not the end of any drug development program, necessarily. But really it's just the FDA making sure that we have a safe process here.
Right, right. And then before I let you go, I want to get your thoughts on something thematic. You know, we have, I guess, a lot of pharmaceutical companies that work on, you know, do drugs on sort of based on chemical compounds and biotechnology in the name. It's you know, sort of, you know, out of biology, out of cells, out of things that are alive. What applications do you think that sort of nanotechnology may ultimately have in sort of the drug space? In other words, you know, for, you know, somebody like me who is not so familiar with space, could we build, you know, little robots small enough and programmable enough to attack the cells that we want to attack, say for a cancer, for instance? Is there a future in nanotechnology in, you know, in the health space?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, just generally nanotechnology, just really, really small, um, technology. We've used a lot of nanotechnology in developing a lot of biotechnology, processes, and things that we use. I think one of the main ways in which nanotechnology has really helped transform biotechnology is in DNA sequencing. So the ability to sequence DNA. So knowing, when we sequence the whole genome, really big event, maybe 20 years ago now or longer. That really spurred an incredible amount of biological innovation, just because it kind of opened up the world of new targets and kind of different pathways and how those interact. And that was really enabled by nanotechnology, that DNA sequencing technology. Um, so it's really been fundamental in the industry. And then in terms of the design of drugs, so that there are, we think of drugs as, small molecules, sometimes antibodies. There are kind of different therapeutic modalities being developed, such as the RNA vaccines from Moderna. They kind of employ nanotechnology, and so maybe different delivery methods of drugs, which may be more efficient, maybe get drugs to parts of the body that we're unable to do so. So they've been really helpful there as well.
That's great. Well, thank you so much for your time today. It was really a pleasure having you, Robert, and we look forward to having you again on the show sometime soon.
Great, thanks a lot, Ty. Great to be here.
And that will do it for Global Money Talk, live from the New York Stock Exchange. We're so excited to bring you daily coverage here on Sampro TV. You can check out the show anytime on our YouTube channel by searching Global Money Talk. Thanks so much for joining us, and we'll be back here tomorrow. Have a nice day.